Hello, friends, enemies, strangers, kind mothers, those in the bardo. All kinds of sentient beings. All kinds of spirits. Gods and demons. Dakas and dakinis. Angels. Devils. Did I mention those in the bardo? Hungry ghosts, hell beings, animals, all humans. Jealous gods and top gods. Welcome to Buddhism for Happiness for All. So, I found a book I'd like to go over. I found it on PDF. Let's see. A book titled A Cultural History of Tibet. It came out in 1968, but they had a much more recent edition, 2003, and one of the authors passed away, and so in the introduction, the living author gave an acknowledgement and also some interesting information about Tibet right off. So the author that was still alive was David Snellgrove. The author that passed away was Hugh Richardson. So they teamed up together and put the book called A Cultural History of Tibet. So so it sounds like the authors were saying that it was hoped, and it is helped. It is hoped, and it will, and in the future, it is hoped that in the future, the continuing availability of the book, I suppose, of what and the sources used for the book that are mentioned in the points given in the book will remain in the public's mind, in the public's heart, in the public's view. It is hoped that the public has the correct view of the history, of the historical right of the Tibetan people to self-determination. At the most, any valid Chinese claim to authority over Tibet goes back only to the mid-18th century, a far shorter period than any claim which the English maintained over Ireland, or that which the major European powers once claimed over colonized territories in any other part of the world. Also, it's saying that goes back only to the mid-18th century. So around the 1750s is when it's as far back as China can assume to claim Tibet as being part of China. So before that, there's a long history of Tibet. It goes back another 1,000 years, possibly more. That Tibet was independent of China for 1,000 years. It developed its own culture, its own history, relatively independently of China. I guess everyone is interdependent, but you could say that the Tibetan people developed their own history for 1,000 years until the 1750s, when maybe China started to attempt to claim Tibet. And you could say that the English maintained control over Ireland farther back than that. And you could say the major European powers were claiming colonized territories as theirs farther back than that too. It is fair to note, however, that an earlier, far more tenuous Chinese claim, though their one-time Mughal rulers, through their Mughal rulers. In other words, China may claim Tibet by saying, yes, way back, we had possession of Tibet, but it wasn't really them who had it. It was the Mongol rulers who had it, who at the same time had control of China. So that's been made as a claim that goes as far back as 1249. The year 1249. Interesting number, 1249. Remember Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492. 1492. So if you move the 2 towards the front, insert it between the 1 and the 4, you get 1249. Try it again. Start off with 1492, grab the 2, move it back 3 digits. Let's see. Yep, 2 digits. Slide it back. And you get 1249. It's a good way to remember. So, back in 1249, the Mongol chieftain, in other words, the Mongolian Empire had taken over not just China, but Tibet. And then China today makes the claim that, we had Tibet back then. But it wasn't them who had it, it was the Mongolian Empire. The Mongol chieftain, Godan Khan, governor of Kansu province, appointed the Sakya Pandita as regent of Tibet. Sakya Pandita. Wow. That's a famous person, Sakya Pandita. Look him up. I think he was not merely a regent or a governor of Tibet. I think he was also a Buddhist master. I don't know if he was a monk, but he was at least a master. And legendary too, maybe. He had some powers, but I would say he left something, or something was attributed to him. Sakya Pandit. You can look him up. I'll look him up in this phone. Let's see. Okay. So I'll go to. Let's go Sakya Pandita. Sakya. Sakya Pandita. So the Sakya Pandita Kunga Gyaltsen was a Tibetan spiritual leader and Buddhist scholar and the fourth of the 5 Sakya forefathers. He was he was important for the Sakya lineage. Sakya Pandita. Let's look at the Encyclopedia of Buddhism. Sakya Pandita Kunga Gyaltsen. Kunga. Let's see if I can read it. Sakya Pandita Kunga Gyaltsen. I can read it. I can read the Tibetan characters, more or less. Well, you want me to show you? Okay, let's see if I can show you, so I can brag. Sakya Pandita Kunga Gyaltsen. Let's see. Put it like this. There we go. So, Sakya Pandita Kunga. That's a compound syllable. So the prefix and suffix are not pronounced. So the ga is in the middle. That's the root. So the root character, or the root of the syllable. the but a prefix of I believe it's ta. And that's a suffix of ah. So it's ga. Sakya Pandita. Gun Ga Gyeltsen. Sakya Pandita Gun Ga Gyeltsen. Sakya Pandita. Sakya Pandita Kung. The ga. Yeah, that's the. Ergyaltsen. So yeah, the R is kind of silent. The M is kind of silent, so it's Gyaltsen, that it's pronounced sen, like that. Kunga Gyaltsen. I think that's Wiley. This one is Wiley, and that one is phonetic, more or easier. He lived in the thousands. 1182. To November 28, 1251. So in 1249, he became the regent of Tibet. So he was a Tibetan spiritual leader and Buddhist scholar, and the fourth of the 5 Sakya forefathers. Kunga Gyaltsen is generally known simply as Sakya Pandita, or Sapan, a title given to him in recognition of his scholarly achievements and knowledge of Sanskrit. Wow. He is held in the tradition to have been an emanation of Manjushri, the embodiment of the wisdom of all the Buddhas. Sakya Pandita was also known as a great scholar in Tibet, India, Mongolia, and China, and was proficient in the 5 great sciences of Buddhist philosophy: medicine, grammar, dialectics, and sacred Sanskrit literature, as well as the minor sciences of rhetoric, synonymies, poetry, music, dancing, and astrology. He's considered to be the 4th Sakya forefather in the 6th Sakya Tritsing, and one of the most important figures in the Sakya lineage. Early life. Born as Palden Dondup at Sakya. That must be a place in Tibet, Sakya. In the noble family of Jamyang Kun. This lineage had held the abbotship of Sakya on a hereditary basis since 1073. His father was Palchen Upache, and his mother Machik Nitri Cham, nephew of Jetsun Drakpa Gyaltsen, and became the principal disciple of this prominent scholar. He was instructed in the sutras and tantras by Drakpa Gyaltsen and mastered Sanskrit and 3 inner Asian languages. Eventually, he was initiated as a Shramanera by his master and given religious name Kunga Gyaltsen. So the Sakya tradition, I guess you can become a monk in that tradition, but you can also have a family life, seems like. As a young monk, he visited the prominent Kashmiri scholar Sakya Sri, who ordained him as a bhikshu in 1208. Kashmiri. And taught him sutras and mantras. Legend has it that he visited Kirong and his way back, and there defeated a Brahman Shastri in a debate on logic. Then overcame his opponent in a contest of supernatural powers, as he wanted to show his fellow Tibetans the peculiar dress of Indian Brahmin priests. He brought the Shastri to Tibet, where he was killed by protective deities of the land. Then the Shastri head was then tied to a pillar of a great temple in Sakya, which remained until modern times. The experience of Sakya Pandita on Indian learning provided a notably Indian influence to his scholarship later on. His ordination as bhikshu marked the inception of Sakya as a proper monastic order. So maybe he was one of the first Sakyas to become ordained. Sakya as a Sakya clan, or this is not Shakya like Shakyamuni. This is Sakya, right? It's different from that, right? Because Sakya is a place in Tibet, right? Let's see, at Sakya. Oh, the page has not yet been created. Mongol invasion. Oh, here's the good part. According to later Tibetan historiography, Genghis Khan subjugated a king of Tibet in 1206 and then sent a letter to the Sakya abbot. After the death of Genghis Khan in 1227, the Tibetans stopped sending tribute. This is, however, a legend without historical foundation. It is known, however, that the grandson of Genghis Khan and second son of Ogedei Khan, Godan Khan, was granted an appanage at Liangchao, present-day Wuwei, Gansu, in 1239. In 1240, he sent an invasion force under Dorta into Tibet. The Mongols reached the Panyul Valley north of Lhasa, killing some 500 monks, destroying and looting monasteries, villages, and towns. The Gyalhak Khan monastery went up in flames, and many monks of the Reting monastery were slaughtered by the horsemen. The Drikung monastery was saved, ostensibly since the Mongols believed that the sudden avalanche of stones could be attributed to the supernatural powers of the lamas. According to El Pitek, the Reting monastery itself escaped destruction when Dorta reached Dam, and its abbot suggested the Mongols to contact Sakya Pandita, who was a famous author and religious figure and could represent the Tibetans vis-a-vis the Mongols. According to J.Y. Chang, it was rather the Drikung abbot who made the proposal. Later chronicles assert that Dorta sent the message to British and enumerated the foremost sects and lamas of Tibet. They were the Kadam, the Taklung, the Drikung, and the Sakya. Godang drew the conclusion that Sakya Pandita was an important and wise lama who could show the road to salvation, in order to send a letter of invitation and presents to him. So the actual reason for selecting the Sakya might have been that the sect was specialized in magic rituals that resonated with Mongol beliefs and was prominent in spreading Buddhist morality. It was also important that Sakya Pandita was a religious hierarch by birth, and thus represented a dynastic continuity useful for the Mongol aim to rule via respected intermediaries. Sakya Pandita was indeed summoned to come to Godan's royal camp at Liangzhou in 1244. The cleric left Sakya in the company of his two young nephews, the 10-year-old Pagba and the 6-year-old Chakna Dorje. As he continually preached sermons along his way, he did not arrive at Prince Godan's camp until 1246. There he had to wait for Godan, who at the time participated in Kurultai, where Goyok Khan was enthroned. The Sakya Pandita and Godan first met in early 1247. He gave religious instruction to the prince and greatly impressed the court with his personality and powerful teaching. He also said to have cured Prince Godan of a serious illness, probably leprosy. In return, he was allegedly given temporary authority over the 13 Mayarkis of central Tibet. Since the Mayarkis were not yet constituted by this time, the story is not entirely correct. It should be understood in the sense that Sakya Pandita was used as the main agent of the Mongols in Tibetan affairs. Tibetan historians quote a long letter by his hand to the various clerical and temporal lords in Tibet in 1249. So, in order to spare Tibet from devastating invasion, he wrote, it was necessary that the local regimes unconditionally accepted Mongol overlordship. A consensus was to be taken, and the lords must henceforth carry out the administration in consultation with envoys dispatched by Sakya, and in accordance with Mongol law. However, the sources keep silent about the actual imposition of Mongol rule in these years. The death of Guyuk Khan in 1248 led to the internal rivalries in the dynasty of Genghis Khan until the enthronement of Mongke Khan in 1251. This left Tibetan affairs in a state of limbo for the time being. After Sakya Pandita died, the new Mongol ruler Mongke Khan chose to patronize the Drikum Kagyu, while the other main schools were put under the protection of various Mongol princes. Nevertheless, a decree from 1252 states that the Sakya precepts should be followed in the main. Meanwhile, Pagpa won a position in the court of Mongke's brother Kublai Khan and became the tantric guru of the prince in 1258. So when Kublai came to power in 1260, he appointed Pagpa Guoshi preceptor of the kingdom. Thus began a strong Sakya-Mongol alliance, and the seat or Densa of Sakya became the administrative capital of Tibet in 1264. That lasted until about the middle of the 14th century, around 1350, during the reign of the 14th Sakya Trizin, Amadapa Sonam Gyaltsen, the Maoist China Chan Chup Gyaltsen of Bagmodrupa dynasty, began to subordinate the central Tibetan province, marking the beginning of the end of the period of Sakya power in central Tibet. Then there is the lineage of the Tibetan Panchen Lamas. There were considered to be the 4 Indian and 3 Tibetan tulkus of Amitabha before Kedrup Gelik Peltsang, first Panchen Lama. The lineage starts with Subhuti, one of the original disciples of Gautama Buddha. Sakya Pandita is considered to be the second Tibetan emanation of Amitabha in this line. Okay, but let's see, that's more than 4, right? What I wanted to read was what summary I get from the book in PDF form, the book called A Cultural History of Tibet by David Snellgrove and Hugh Richardson. So they talk about what China supposedly claims. It has supposedly claimed that it had Tibet under its thumb as far back as 1249. But that's when the Mongol chieftain Golden Khan, governor of Kansu province, appointed the Sakya Pandita as a regent of Tibet. Subsequently, Kublai Khan, then governor of the Mongol-occupied territories in the northern western borders areas of the Sung Empire, became the first Mongol emperor of China. Aha! So Kublai Khan took over China, right? Thus, the earlier Mongol suzerainty over Tibet has been claimed by this later association as a Chinese one. But that's wrong. So one such terms the Tibetan claim to independence in the modern world is surely indisputable. The Tibetans have a clear history of their own, testifying to their ambivalent relations with their neighbors, of whom the Chinese have certainly been, in recent centuries, the most important. They have a distinct language and literature of their own, going back at least to the 7th century AD, when they represented undeniably the major power in Central Asia. That distinct culture and their deeply revered religion differentiates them totally from their Chinese neighbors. Yes, their culture and their type. Could you call it type? Their flavor of Buddhism has, as far back then, since the 7th century onwards, has been distinct. You could say a branch of Buddhism. Well, both Tibetan Buddhism, or should I say the Buddhism that came from Tibet and the Buddhism that came from China, well, they're not all one together. There's sub lineages in Tibet and sub lineages in China. But if you were to group them together, because they're similar, kind of sort of like dialects. What happens with dialects? With a language and its dialects. So you could say, because they're separated geographically. So it's good to understand the geography of Tibet. So maybe we'll look into that. But before that, let's consider the early kings of Tibet. Or maybe what made Tibet an empire, you could say. Or what united Tibet. The Tibet of the early kings. you could call that part one of the history of Tibet, the early kings, shows significant analogies with Anglo-Saxon England and Western Europe under the Franks, Lombards, Visigoths, and other Germanic peoples during more or less the same period, 5th to the 9th centuries. So there's a parallel, you could say, between Tibet and surrounded peoples of Tibet, or within Tibet itself. Maybe there were different peoples. They were not so united. And in Europe, there were the Anglo-Saxons, there were the Franks, the Lombards, the Visigoths, and Germanic people. Maybe perhaps because England was an island, maybe that helped make the people in England kind of become more think of themselves more distinctly, more patriotically. When you're an island, you become more patriotic towards the island itself, perhaps. Is that the right word, patriotic? Well, it's better than nationalistic, I would say. But yeah, from the 5th centuries to the 9th centuries, there was a lot going on in Europe and in England, the British Isles. We note the existence of the same kind of settled agricultural system, supported by cattle and sheep rearing, and much of the same kind of established monarchic rule. Despite the earlier occupation of parts of Europe by the Romans, for which there is no parallel on the Tibetan side. So in continental Europe, and at times part of the British Isles, there was Roman rule, and then it fell apart. That didn't happen in Tibet. It was never ruled that way. Maybe it was more nomadic, I imagine, and somewhat agricultural too. It's hard to do agriculture in Tibet, I would think. Well, they probably, certain areas can grow hardy vegetables, hardy plants like barley. That's the one I can think of. In the sphere of religion, what was the religion like in Tibet between the 5th and 9th century? Well, you could say that it didn't have a religion. It eventually would have Buddhism as the religion by the 8th or 9th century as the official religion, if the king said so, and they probably said so by then. In the sphere of religion, striking comparisons might be made. So both in Western Europe and Tibet, there were indigenous religious practices based on oral traditions remained strong, while the great universal religion, Christianity, on the European side, and Buddhism on the Tibetan side, was beginning to establish itself. That must have been around the 7th century on both sides. With the occasional support of interested local rulers. So whenever whenever there was a local ruler in Europe that had become Christian, then they would want their kingdom to become Christian too, and probably happened the same way in Tibet. So Tibet of the Middle Ages, that would be approximately the 10th to the 15th centuries, bears many analogies with our European Middle Ages. On both sides, the great universal religions triumphed, bringing in their terrain, maybe? A whole new range of philosophical ideas, literary themes, arts and crafts, largely Greco-Roman for us, and largely Indian for the Tibetans. By absorbing and reworking all this new material, both Western Europe and Tibet developed vigorous and colorful civilizations, in which the established religions of Christianity for Europe and Buddhism for Tibet often played a very worldly part, despite the extraordinary sanctity of some of their devotees. Sanctity as in being very holy and very ascetic, very removed from the worldly affairs, and yet somehow they were forced to be involved. Let's see. So the physical scene. Let's look at the geography of Tibet. The physical scene. So Tibet is renowned as the most remote, as well as the most inaccessible country of the world. Can you imagine that? The most remote and most inaccessible country in the world? Well, this book was written in the late 60s. Is it still remote? Is it still inaccessible? Well, the Chinese have built a sky train into Tibet, so it's becoming more civilized in a way. More Han people live in Tibet now. So there's the Han culture. In other words, Chinese, Mandarin Chinese probably. And Maoist government. And the people in Tibet that led a nomadic life, they've been forced to stop living that way. Because their lands are gone. Maybe they're dividing up the lands amongst the Chinese. It's surrounded. So what's Tibet in the different regions of Tibet? So, or the borders. So to the south, the west, and the north, you find massive mountain ranges. Well, the south and west, it would be the Himalayan mountains. Or should I say the south and the southwest, the Himalayan mountains. But in the north, there's also some massive mountain ranges too. So in the north, you got mountain ranges ranging from 6,000 to 8,000 meters above sea level. No, the Himalayas are 6,000 to 8,000 meters above sea level. The Karakoram is also in that range, and from 5 to 7,000 meters along the Kunlun Range. Where's that? The general level of western and central Tibet is from 4 to 5,000 meters above sea level. The whole country is traversed by subsidiary mountain ranges which reach to 6,000 meters and more. This great mountainous area, as large as the whole of Scandinavia, is tilted towards the east, where it is drained by the Sangpo, the Brahmaputra. I guess that goes into India eventually, which flows almost the whole southern length of the country, and by the Salween, the Mekong, and the Yangtze, which all rise in the remote eastern parts of Tibet. And I guess they go eastwards. Well, the Yangtze goes to China, and the Mekong goes to Indonesia, maybe even to Laos and Thailand, Vietnam area. Although there is no single well-defined mountain barrier to the east, the centers of Tibetan civilization were as much cut off from the rest of the world on this side as on the other sides, because of the vast distances to be traveled across uninhabited wastes and a whole series of subsidiary mountain ranges. Until the middle of the present century, the journey from Lhasa to Beijing normally took 8 months. The northern part of Tibet, representing 3/7 of the whole country, is virtually uninhabited wilderness of mountain spurs and ranges, interspersed with bleak, barren plains, stretches of soda-encrusted soil, and innumerable small lakes and pools of brackish water. Brackish water? What is that? Although subject to short spells of heat, it is usually a country of intense cold and bitter winds which prevent the occasional snow from lying in any but sheltered valleys. Here lived the wild yak, drong, and the ass, kyang, the antelope with a jod, that's GTJOD, and the wolves that prey upon them. The regions are rarely visited. The regions are rarely visited rarely by hunters and gatherers of salt, soda, and borax. Salt, soda, and borax, oh my. But they were traversed in the late 19th and early 20th century by several adventurous foreign explorers. A further 2/7 of the country, still high and cold, but tempered by more southerly situation, lying approximately between latitude 30 degrees and 32 degrees north It's a land of sparse grazing and rolling plateau, lofty ranges of snow-capped mountains and great lakes. Here in small scattered groups of nomadic herdsmen, a people of extraordinary hardiness and endurance wander with their tents, tending great herds of yaks, sheep, and goats. The higher pasture lands live such animals as gazelles, the goba, blue sheep, nga, bears, dread and dom, and foxes, wamo. Phew. So how do you like that? So where am I going here? Why does this matter? Well, you can appreciate what a difficult land it is to live. How did they survive? There's not much trees there. It looks like living on the moon. Well, there's water. Nice blue lakes. What is it? It said brackish water, brackish lakes. I don't know what brackish means. Maybe it's blackish? No. I got the PDF. Maybe I could flip it. I could do that now. I could go like this and flip over to the PDF. So flip the phone and look at this. So there's the PDF. I copied a few interesting parts of it. This is a cultural history of Tibet. That's the way it looks. Cultural history of Tibet. Maybe I could find the paperback and order it. Amazon. Orchard Press. In Thailand? 2003. The authors are David Snellgrove and Hugh Richardson. Orchard Press, Bangkok, 2003. That's right. So what I read, I found, let's see if I can find what I picked up. I started looking at the preface to the 2003 edition, and I found something in it interesting. Yes, I copied. We hope that its continuing availability This edition follows so soon upon the 1995 edition, when the bibliography was brought up to date, that no changes in the content of the book would yet seem to be necessary. So then it talks about Hugh Richardson. He lived in Lhasa for for a few years. Spent 9 years in Lhasa, doing some work, researching, I suppose. But then, so I got around to the Tibet of the Early Kings, Part 1. Ooh. No. Let's see. So, yeah. Part 1 of the Early Kings. But I read the physical scene. What's Tibet like? The most remote as well as the most inaccessible country in the world. Country. It's considered a country. It's not China. China claims that it is China, but it's not. It's a country that Chinese Maoists took over in 1950. In 1959, the Dalai Lama escaped with his government and got refuge in India, the land from where Buddhism came from. It's a very interesting story. It was nice of the Indians to give them refuge. It was hard on the Tibetan people. So I also looked up things in this yes, I looked up Genghis Khan or Sakya Pandita. That's in the Encyclopedia of Buddhism, where I read about Sakya Pandita. So, I hope you liked what I did today. Don't forget to dedicate. It's coming up on an hour. So this will be an hour discussion, and I hope you like this video and consider subscribing to the channel. I'm calling it, unless I have to host it somewhere else, but my intention is to host it in a channel called Buddhism for Happiness for All. But I'm using the number 4 instead of writing the word for. Buddhism for Happiness for All. Okay, maybe I could rename it Buddhism for Happiness 2. I was thinking of calling it Buddhism for Happiness 2. Because I used to have a channel called Buddhism for Happiness. Rest in peace. That channel passed away suddenly. So I'm hoping that some of what I tried to do in that channel comes into this channel. But I hope to go beyond what I was hoping in the previous channel. and make it this an even better channel than it could ever be. So thank you. I hope you guys and gals support me in my effort. And I'm trying to dedicate all the wonderful merit I accumulated to all my kind mothers. Thank you. May someone benefit from this. I know I will.